Chapter 26 in our California Studies class discusses some of the cultural trends that were going on during the Depression, say the mid-1920s to the mid-1940s. The Depression didn't go that long, but during this era, this 20-year period, there was quite a bit of, it was a very dynamic time for creativity in California, perhaps because of the times. One of the premier writers of the time, at least many people say he was Robinson Jeffers. He studied the Bible as literature as a child. The family moved from Pennsylvania to Pasadena in 1903. He attended Occidental College. He attended USC. He married a fellow student. He and his wife settled in the Carmel area, where he realized that this would be the place where he would be producing his body of work. He wrote long narrative poems with dark, tragic themes. He defended that dark work, saying that the themes were not unlike Sophocles or Shakespeare, since in his time, 2 wars killed 100 million people. And that was his justification for his very dark themes. Robinson Jeffers. One writer, obviously, we need to mention in this era is John Steinbeck, who was born in Salinas in 1902. These writings had a distinctive relation to the Salinas Valley and Monterey. Early works included Cup of Gold, 1929, Pastures of Heaven, 1932, Tortilla Flat in 1935. In Dubious Battle in 1936, this book dealt with a strike of farm workers, which, of course, this was going on at the time in the 1930s because of the labor unrest because of the Depression. And, of course, his most famous book, The Grapes of Wrath, which was published in 1939, made into a movie by 1940 starring Henry Fonda, was his most famous work. And believe it or not, because of the politics at the time, because there were a lot of farm labor camps in the southern San Joaquin Valley and Kern County, with a lot of people who were trying to make a better life because of the Depression and the Dust Bowl, the book, The Grapes of Wrath, was actually banned from the local library by the Kern County Board of Supervisors, if you can imagine that. What's even more interesting in contemporary times, in the last several years, the budget of the county of Monterey was so strapped that they were actually seriously considering closing their libraries until people said, hey, we are not going to close our libraries in Monterey County. This is the home of John Steinbeck, and they did manage to raise money to keep the libraries open. We need to mention William Saroyan. One of the things I miss about the downtown Metropolitan Museum here in Fresno, the Met as they called it, which of course is now closed, they had a lot of financial issues and leadership issues, was that they had a permanent exhibit dedicated to William Saroyan. He was born in Fresno in 1908. He died in Fresno in 1981. He lived in Fresno, he lived in San Francisco, he lived in Paris. His parents were immigrants from Armenia, when I suppose they began to see the writing on the wall prior to the collapse of the Ottoman Empire and the Armenian genocide. He did not graduate from high school or college. He sold newspapers on the streets, and he was a telegraph operator. His style of writing could be called creative spontaneity. He worked to establish what he called a tradition of carelessness in writing. His most famous novel of all was The Human Comedy, which was made into a movie. Even though it was about a couple of brothers by the name of the Macaulay brothers, and the town was Ithaca, California, it was really autobiographical about himself and his brother living in Fresno, California during World War II. So much more could be said here about William Saroyan that I just really feel like we're cheating him. Having such a local connection. There were a lot of older people in town who knew him. He was kind of a curmudgeon, kind of a grouchy old guy. He had 2 houses next door to each other on West Griffith Avenue, kind of what we would call today Northwest Fresno. And he would often be seen riding his bicycle, with that big gray handlebar mustache. One house he lived in on West Griffith, and one house he actually just collected junk in. Right here in Fresno. He was married to a woman by the name of, what was her name? I think her last name was Marcus. I can't remember her first name at the top of my head. They were married, they divorced, then they remarried for a year, divorced again, and ultimately his ex-wife married the actor Walter Matthau. Kind of interesting to note. There were other writers of this era in California who were quite significant at the time. Nathaniel West was quite significant in the LA area, especially. And then there was also Aldous Huxley, who was famous for his novel Brave New World. So these are definitely some writers of note. Nathaniel West, his famous book was The Day of the Locust. Huxley and West mutually had a distaste for the way Southern California was developing. And these were recurrent themes in the writings of Nathaniel West and Aldous Huxley. Then there was William Randolph Hearst. Now, your book calls him a journalist. In reality, he was really a newspaper publisher. And of course, we talked about him earlier as going for the sensational journalism. We talked about his parents as well in the beginnings of his newspaper empire back in chapter 17. His publishing empire at its peak in 1932 included 26 newspapers in the United States, including 4 of the top 5 in circulation in California. He was eccentric by any standard. He built a lavish residence on a mountaintop overlooking the Pacific, which we now call Hearst Castle, in northern San Luis Obispo County. If you have never gone through Hearst Castle, which is now a state park, you need to go. There are several tours. There are different tours in the winter than in the summer. I highly, highly recommend you spending the money and going over there and touring Hearst Castle. You can get an idea of how lavishly this man lived because he was quite wealthy because of his newspaper empire. He employed the first female architect in California, Julia Morgan, to design and build it. And what's interesting is, because as you know, the coastal mountains of California are quite earthquake prone, as in the San Andreas Fault. Julia Morgan was the first architect in California to build structures of reinforced concrete to withstand earthquakes, long before there were regulations pursuant to the seismic standards, the way they build buildings. Here's an aerial picture of Hearst Castle from the California State Parks Department. On the right, in the upper part there, you see Julia Morgan working with William Randolph Hearst as they were building this lavish residence, and a smaller picture of Julia Morgan. Talking about other aspects of the arts in early 20th century California, San Francisco was certainly the cultural leader until after World War II, when LA started to emerge in the arts. In San Francisco, you have the MH, the Young Memorial Museum. You have the California Palace of the Legion of Honor, which of course is pictured here. And then close to downtown, south of Market, you have the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, the San Francisco MoMA, which is really worth going to if you've never been. In Los Angeles, there is the Otis Art Institute. Obviously, Harrison Gray Otis was a big financier of that institution. The Trinard Art Institute, the Henry E. Huntington Library and Art Gallery are also of note in the LA area. There are lots of wonderful museums in California. I wish I could just spend time going to them because I would learn a lot, and if you ever have an opportunity to go to a premier museum in California, you should do so. Photography as art really had its heyday in California as well. I mean, you think of the big cities like New York and so on, but in California, there were people who were part of federal government programs to appropriately document the strife of people during the Depression, and then later on, there were people who documented with photographs the internment of Japanese in World War II in California. Imogene Cunningham and Dorothea Lange are noteworthy. This is the infamous picture, or famous if you will, by Dorothea Lange, called Migrant Mother. This is a farm worker and her children, her 3 children. You can see a baby down there, kind of huddled up in a dirty blanket. This was taken in the Nipomo area near Santa Maria. Lange reported the plight of these Dust Bowl refugees in a book called An American Exodus. It came out in 1940. She later on recorded the tragedy, as I mentioned, of the Japanese-American relocation of World War II. Not mentioned in this chapter, surprisingly, prominent California photographers, Ansel Adams and Edward Weston, very, very important photographers. Let's talk about architecture. Willis Polk co-designed the San Francisco Ferry Building, which still stands today. Bernard Maybeck designed the San Francisco Palace of Fine Arts. Julia Morgan, I mentioned earlier, designed Hearst Castle and built it, and 700 other California structures. By the way, there are 2 structures in Fresno attributed to Julia Morgan. One is the dormitory of the YWCA on M Street, which is still functional and stands today. And also, I believe, just near Fresno City College, about the 600 block or so of I think East Peralta, there is a single-family residence attributed to Julia Morgan. Charles and Henry Green created what's called the California bungalow style of single-family residences. Many of these can especially be found in Pasadena. There is a part of Pasadena that actually has a sign on the street saying Bungalow Heaven. Then there was also Irving Gill, who used modernism in architecture, plaster-coated reinforced walls, flat roofs, and simple windows. And Richard Neutra was the one who really was the one who pushed the use of sliding glass doors, or really whole walls in Southern California, of glass, in order to use the natural light and the magnificent scenic vistas, especially if you were lucky enough and rich enough to live along the Southern California coast. Now, on the right is a typical Pasadena bungalow. On the left is actually the only green and green house in Fresno. It's located on the northwest corner of South 8th and East Balch, just south of Huntington Boulevard, about a mile east of downtown. This photograph is attributed by Mark Cross of the Fresno Bee, and also it was a house that sold over the summer of the summer of 2013. Its owners got transferred to another job. So I thought I'd point this out, that on the left, that is the only green and green attributed house in Fresno. And there's a little bit about architecture and the arts in California, chapter 26.